Do you have a favorite?
Not meant to. But mostly the unloved ones, the unvisited ones, the cases that get dusty and ignored. All the broken and shunned creatures. Someone's got to care for them. Who shall it be if not us?
Yes.
Welcome to Rune Soup, a weekly podcast about magic, culture, and the very best new and old ideas for living in this world. Coming to you from 43 degrees south on a small farm in deepest Tasmania. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. This week, we welcome to the show educator, activist, lawyer, anthropologist, speaker, and Bardi woman, Munya Andrews. Munya joins us today to talk about her work in general, and most specifically her book, Journey into Dreamtime. Even for a lot of people inside Australia, let alone the rest of the world, Aboriginal notions of the dreaming or dreamtime are often difficult to pass. Munya's book, in my humble opinion, is the clearest exploration of these notions I've probably ever found, and she graciously joins us today to talk about them. Enjoy. Munya, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome. Yes.
So we were chatting just before I hit the record button, and you were asking about the show, which means you haven't heard an episode, which is great. And I'll tell you why. We have a traditional first question for first-time guests. And you don't know what it is, but I'm about to ask it.
Yes.
So Munya, were you a weird kid?
Yes, I was. In answer to that, I think I still am.
Oh, good.
I think I still am a weird kid. Look, I always thought differently from other people, even at school. You know, I was the kid that would question why if I was told something, but why and why? Where did you get that information? You can imagine that can drive teachers nuts. But I just wouldn't accept being told anything without evidence and that. So, and just feeling very differently from other people. So, so I guess that makes me, a weird kid.
Well, definitely a little bit annoying if you're the one who's asking all the questions. That's lovely.
Yeah, well, it was, and it was more so just not accepting being told that things are the way they are. Yeah. I think everybody, should question everything.
No,
Sorry.
that's, absolutely. I mean, was that, do you think that's a defining feature of what it is you came to do? I mean, where exactly did you grow up where you were doing this?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Kimberley region of Western Australia, fairly remote area, in a little town called Derby. About then it was only probably 2,000 people. It's probably a little bit more now, grown a bit more. But so very remote area of Australia.
Wow, yes. It does have Qantas flights now, so it has grown a bit, hasn't it?
Yes, and of course, Broome is down the road at 200 k's, and it's becoming, fast, becoming a resort town. So people are beginning to find out more about the Kimberley.
Right. And was there, growing up in an Indigenous context and going to, I guess, state schools or what have you, is that where some of the tension between you being told things that you don't think were correct, is that where some of the tension that sort of led to the career you've had comes from, do you think?
I think so. I went to a Catholic school and taught by nuns largely. And nuns
that was my mother. I'm so sorry.
No. It's actually great because they're different from other teachers in that when you think about them, mostly all women, and they're a pretty strong bunch of women in a lot of ways. They're still caught within an organisation. But there's been evidence to show that people that have been taught by nuns do very well academically. And,
cool.
And very huge numbers go on to do university studies. So there's something to be said for them.
Right. And I mean, tell us, we want to talk about your amazing book once we get to that part, I guess, of the story. But how do how does the kid from the Kimberley end up being this author? What was the journey sort of off country and into the world?
Yeah, I suppose, again, being very curious about the world, and movies was my entree to a world that was so far away from me. Through movies, I learned about places as far away as Europe and like that. But even just the isolation within Australia, learning about other states and so forth. So there was a natural hunger and learning for what was out there, what existed out there. And I remember sitting at school, and I often sat alone by myself, during the lunch breaks and that, but looking out at the Derby Marsh and wondering what was out there, what kind of a world was out there. So I read a lot. I'm still a fastidious reader. I read everything because I love learning. So there, and I've always been that way. And I always wanted to know why things work. And so I'm very drawn to the sciences as well. So it just from that, about just wanting to know about other lands and other peoples, that led me on this journey. And of course, reading a lot of books, and that I think sort of paves the way to becoming an author, because you start to think, well, this person wrote this book and they wrote on that. Yeah, maybe I can write something on whatever. And so that's how it began, really. Just a natural curiosity, yeah.
Usually when people who are authors come on the show and they say very similar things. The reason I ask the weird kid question is usually, it loosens people up and they get to say things about their childhood and what have you. But also, there are patterns. I've been doing this show for a couple of years, and invariably people who end up in the show are a weird kid. But one of the other patterns is they were bookish children very often, and they have memories of books from being teenagers that ended up changing their life when they look back on it. Do you have any books that leap out at you that when you encountered them as a kid, you're like, this is amazing?
Yeah, that's really interesting. When I went to kindergarten, I was dropped. One of the nuns met me at the gate, and she took me into the room. And when I walked in, the first thing I saw was one of those folding libraries, and I went over and parked myself down there, and just immediately picked up a book and started reading. So from that time, I can remember one book about a little girl called Penelope. Of course, I didn't know how to pronounce her name properly. And it wasn't until I went to boarding school and there was a young girl, she comes up to me and says, "Hello, I'm Penelope." And I went, "Oh, that's my Penelope," that I remember reading about this little girl called Penelope. And so for me, it was very much also about learning about English and learning to pronounce English words properly. So that stood out most of all. But, and then I remember getting those, the golden books and the ones that were audio and you could play the little record. And, of course, there was the book Alice in Wonderland. But I must say, I thought that was really weird. and I just thought, what's this adult on? And so there were lots of books, like, I did the Dick and Jane, and lots of books of England and places like that. So a lot of that stood out for me.
Splendid. Something I want to pick up on that you said before about starting to realize as you're a voracious reader that actually maybe I should write a book, or maybe I could say something a bit differently. I picked up your book, Journey into Dreamtime, at a museum. I can't remember where I was, I think.
Okay.
Anyway, and it's fantastic. But we're obviously going to talk about it because the premium members on the website and people who are really interested in this kind of stuff, Indigenous ways of seeing the world and ecology and flourishing and all that kind of stuff. So we'll go through it. But why did you write it? Tell us a story about why this book came to be.
Yeah, it came about through my interest naturally in Indigenous spirituality, and I've been running a number of workshops for a number of years, and always during our cultural awareness sessions that my partner and I, we run Indigenous cultural awareness, do face-to-face learning, and we've got an online program as well. And one of the most popular questions is, Munya, what is Dreamtime? And so I thought, I must write a book to help people understand what Aboriginal Dreamtime is all about, because I believe most Australians are curious and want to know more. And you would know yourself too, Gordon, that a lot of it's tied up in anthropological literature. And I just happen to have an anthropology degree as well. And so I thought, I'd like to write a book in simple terms where, and lose the academic script behind, leave that, because that doesn't help anybody, and write a book that's easy to read and easy to understand on some of the key principles and philosophies of Aboriginal Dreamtime, explaining just exactly what it is. And it's been fantastic. I've had really positive responses to it, and people are saying just how easy it is to digest. One person wrote a review and said, easily the best book ever on Aboriginal Dreamtime. So that was really pleasing to receive that.
It is. It's certainly, that makes a lot of sense to me, because the clarity definitely comes through. Like going to school in Australia in the 80s and 90s was sort of the beginning of. So we had a couple of things. I mean, you would know this, right? But particularly for educational boards, they're grappling with the realities of stolen generation stuff and Mabo and so on. And these are the first 2 decades where they realize, actually, we need to be teaching Australian kids this stuff. And so we would get, and it's funny, I'd been on a quest all through university, and the book Yoro Yoro helped me with it. But we were told these concepts, but they were delivered by well-meaning but bewildered teachers, right? So we would get the first wave of attempts at understanding Indigenous lifeways and Indigenous beliefs in a state school system, right? So we'd get Tiddalik and the Rainbow Serpent, and we'd get like Dreaming or Dreamtime. And I have a distinct memory of my Year 6 teacher. She was an incredible teacher, but she was really she's not Aboriginal, right? She was really struggling to articulate to us, because we were the kids like you were with the questions going, explain this to me. In this book, because I read a lot of anthropological and academic stuff to do with where Australia is now and how we basically where we are now, and cultural and university level stuff. And this book, and I get questions because we do a lot of the spirituality stuff on it as well. I get questions about these terms. And now, Munya, I have your book. I can say what you want to do is get Journey into Dreamtime, and it will be completely clear. So mission accomplished, honestly, if that's where the impetus of the idea came from.
Yes, yeah, and it was to encourage Australians to find out more about Indigenous people, but especially about our spirituality, which, of course, isn't just for Aboriginal people. That's one of my teachers, the fellow who wrote Yoro Yoro, a very dear man to me, and he would always say to me, Munya, Dreamtime isn't just for Aboriginal people, it's for everybody. And so I've really taken that to heart, because I believe it's a spirituality that's there for people to learn more about and to find out more about themselves, especially in this country we call Australia. So
can we, I mean, I guess it's from the same area. Are you saying David Maljala was one of your teachers?
Was one of my teachers, yes.
Oh my goodness. Yes. That's wonderful. Yes. What an amazing man.
What an amazing man. What an incredible man. So I had a lot to do with him growing up in the Kimberley, and he's just a saint. He was a saint. He was a special man sent down here to do good. And I had this dream one time. I was living in Melbourne at the time, and there was this white limousine going past the University of Melbourne where I studied, and it was being escorted by police on motorbikes. And I turned to someone in the street and said, "Oh, who's that?" And someone said, "Oh, it's the big one. The big one's in that limousine." And when I looked looked in the limousine, the window wound down, and there he was, and he waving and smiling to me. And I said, "Yep, you're the big one, all right." He was an incredible man, a very generous man, and a real teacher. One of those special people sent down to come down to earth for us to learn from him, and I was very honoured and very privileged to learn from him.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like, that's wonderful. I mean, as I said, I encountered Yoro at university, and it made me cry in a couple of places. Like, he was so profound and wise. And
Yes.
when I look at things like European or Western spirituality, particularly things like Hermeticism, and what David was saying about on Earth, there is a witness for everything in Sky Crunchy. It's
Yes.
there. The map of the stars down to Earth is Hermeticism. That's Egyptian belief, as above, so below. And
Yes, as above, so below. Yeah, incredible. Yeah. So
that's brilliant. I didn't actually know that, and I'm a huge fan. He was what an amazing person to have met. That's cool.
Mm.
All right. Well, then you can't get these questions wrong because you learned from someone. You learned from the big one, right?
I did learn from the big one, and I don't mean the bug one, but the big one.
Yeah. All right. So let's hit the main question that you said you get asked all the time, and it's sort of the dual question. So, what is Dreamtime, and how is that, or is that separate from the dreaming?
It's one and the same. And, in the book, I get asked that all the time. And one Aboriginal elder said, "Oh, Gadiya people ask me all the time, what is Dreamtime?" And he said, it's a really hard question because Dreamtime is a really big thing for Aboriginal people. And so it's a really big thing. It's about the meaning of life and everything in between. So it's a spirituality. It's a way of life. It's a philosophy. It is that term, of course, is commonly understood right across Australia. There are some Aboriginal people who object to it because they think, oh, it's irrational and whatnot. But I actually like the term because, to me, it conjures up something quite magical and mystical, which Aboriginal Dreamtime, to me, is all about. Another term now being used a lot by our people is dreaming. So they're one and the same thing. So Dreamtime refers to that creative period where our ancestors created the land and the mountains and the rivers and everything in it. But it also refers to Dreamtime is paradoxically also no time. It's about the past, present, and future all being one. So the idea is that you can access that eternal dream time at any stage in life. Now, what's interesting about that is that physicists are now becoming aware that time is circular. It's not a linear thing. And the idea behind quantum computing is how through the observer effect that we all play a part in creation. And that's what Dreamtime teaches, is going back to that time and getting in touch with the ancestral creator beings and creating the world and renewing it, which Yoro Yoro is all about, making the world stand up again, brand new, like everything. So Dreamtime is a lot of those things. Now, some people say, "Oh, is that like dreaming?" And dreams are a part of it, but it's not limited to just that narrow aspect of consciousness, if you like. It's much broader than the dreams that you have at night. But it is, at the end of the day, it's all about how we create things in the world, how we manifest things and bring things into being. So it's about being aware of the elements that are there in the universe and working with the spirits and creator beings. So it's a whole bunch of things. It's about explaining creation. So you mentioned as above, as so below. Aboriginal cosmology is part of that, explaining creation and what lies above. And it's also about how we relate to one another as human beings, but also with our fellow creatures and plants and stones and that. So there's this idea that everything that exists in the world has consciousness. That's the dreaming. And so it's about getting people to get in touch with that broader consciousness and the realization that we're all one, really, sort of at the end of the day. So it's understanding all of that. And there's a whole lot to that, but that's basically what Dreamtime is all about.
Lovely. Really well said. And I'm glad because I'm sure the second most common question you get asked is, how does it relate to the dreams we have when we sleep? And
yes.
Yeah, because I think you're right. That word is beautiful. Like dream is an unsullied word. So I like that dreaming is the word we use for it. But that was, if there's anything else you want to say about actual dreaming and dream time and how they...
Yeah. So the dreams, so when we go to bed at night, Aboriginal people even distinguish between two types of dreams. There's the individual dream that one has, and then there's that broader dream. And Jung talked about this as well, and he called it archetypal dream, that broader one, as opposed to the individual. So our people would have these archetypal dreams, usually the spiritual leaders among us, we call them Maban, clever men and clever women who go off and have these dreams that are part of other worlds and other dimensions, and they come back, they return back to the tribe, and they share those dreams with us and tell us once again what exists out there and their understanding of the world. So dreams are a part of Dreamtime. Quite often, clever men and clever women will go off in their dreams, and they will encounter other beings and other dimensions, and they'll come back and they'll have a story or a song for it. So a lot of the songs that we sing that make up our songlines are a part of the streaming, so that they get that information and they bring back and share with us. And it's all about learning and getting information from these creator beings that exist, and sharing that with the wider group. So it's about sharing information to guide us through life. So they're really important as well. But we do distinguish between the two different kinds of dreams. And very often, as an Aboriginal person, when you're describing a dream to a mob, and they'll say, "Oh, that proper Dreamtime one, that one," or "Oh, yeah," they're interested about what goes on in your mind and that. But when you touch upon really significant things, that's when they start whispering and going, "Oh, yeah, that's proper, that one." And so it's dreams are very
good.
much a tool of our shamanic leaders, our clever men and our clever women.
That's really fascinating. You mentioned Jung in the book, and I have a very high opinion of Carl Jung. So do the listeners, and that kind of distinguishing between like a Dreamtime dream and a normal dream, if you will. It strikes me that even people, even non-Aboriginal people which is all humans, sleep. We probably know that. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, if we kind of have that sort of Bill Nighy sense of feeling as a form of knowledge, I think when we wake up, we know, maybe we don't use those words for it, or maybe we don't use them yet, but we know that some dreams feel significant and other ones are just like the things sloshing around in your mind as you go to sleep.
Yes, exactly, and a lot of those dreams stay with you, we draw upon them from our well of knowledge, if you like, to guide us, and we definitely do know when we've been somewhere special in our dreams.
That's a lovely way of putting it. Does everything have a dreaming?
Yes, everything has a dreaming, including non-animate objects such as cars, Toyota. So, for instance, in some places in Australia, there's Toyota dreamings that have their own songlines and so forth. So everything has dreaming. Everything in existence has its own consciousness and its own dreaming.
That's so cool. I like this before we stay on that before we move to another interrelated concept, because you've already used the word, but what's sickness dreaming? Just to look at it, because that's in the book too, and I think it's useful.
Yeah. So it's like saying there's a reason that sickness exists. Sickness has its own consciousness. And so sickness dreaming, like any of the other dreamings, can be handed to you through your family and passed on. Now, if you have sickness dreaming, very often that means you are a healer and you have the ability to heal because you have some deep inner understanding of sickness and how it affects people. So it makes you the perfect healer, if you like. So there's lots of country across Australia that's acknowledged as being dangerous places to our people. And very often these are usually the sites where uranium is mined, for instance, is identified as sickness country, because people know that when they go to that country, they'll end up with guts ache and bleeding and so forth. So they know that that's sickness country and they stay away. And it's only a person who has that sickness dreaming that can go to that country and be unharmed. So they make the best healers, people who carry sickness dreaming. So it's, once again, it's something that's handed down to you through your family, or you could have an encounter, say, for instance, with the rainbow snake, who is not God, but is a symbol for God, because all of the healers will tell you they get their healing powers from the rainbow snake. So you could just have an encounter with the snake where the snake gives you those talents and those skills, and it's for you to use as a healer.
So sickness dreaming, I think, is really profound, and it's a useful concept to look sideways at other cultures around the world, even European ones, people who would become cunning men or cunning women, or what we might call witches. The idea of a sickness dreaming, or almost like an ancestral curse, because it comes with pain that moves through a family line that allows someone to provide healing. Very interesting, right? Because we find the same thing among shamanic people in Siberia. And it's one of the things that it's dangerous to do. If you've got an anthropology degree, you know what I mean. It's dangerous to do it politically, to make comparisons across the world. But the thing about spirituality is, like, spirit is real. So some things are going to be the same where they show up in other cultures.
Yes, absolutely. And we just have different names for the concept. And that's why in my journey into Dreamtime, I try to draw upon those parallels in other cultures and say, well, you have this understanding of this in your culture. For instance, the idea that God is unknowable, ineffable. And I look to the Jewish tradition, who have a very strong tradition around not being able to name God. So giving people, you have this understanding. We just call it something else.
Yeah. You mentioned country, and we did a course on geography and place and the magic of place last year on the website. And country is the word I introduced. It's mostly Americans, as a way of, I think it's one of those ideas like dreaming that is very medicinal for the whole world, because it's not just land, like country. So I'll get you, Munya, to say, what is country?
Yeah, so country is the land, but more importantly, it's the land where your ancestors come from. So there's a real deep connection with your ancestors way, way, way back in time to particular tracts of land. But it's also, country, for instance, is family to a lot of Aboriginal people. And so they treat country as if they were a human being. So they'll feel sorry for country, they'll cry for country, they get hurt when country is damaged. As we've seen a lot of damage to country with the recent bushfires, and I've seen some of the Facebook posts of Aboriginal people mourning the loss of the country and feeling that sadness and feeling very sorry and feeling at a loss too, almost, where do we go from here? Because country is encompass all of that. It's our land, it's our history, all the songlines, it's our learning, if you like. So country is very significant. So much so that, like in the Kimberley, for instance, we're people that share same country or come from the same country will call themselves countrymen in English, and creolized it becomes countrymen's. So, and often when people will meet up, they'll sing out to each other and going, hello country, how you going country? So it's acknowledging you, having that connection through land and the stories and the songs. And so country is, it's about having a really profound sense of being and a really deep sense of connection with land in a way that I believe all of us have that connection deep down, just that some cultures have been damaged through time and have had, a lot of people been removed from country. You can just think of England, where people have been moved off the land and into the cities and urban areas, moved from that connection. But we know that the old Celtic people had a very strong sense of country and connection. So I believe all human beings have that sense of love and fondness for this land upon which we live. That's country.
Lovely. It's so good. The next one, it's weird, right? There's all these important concepts as they've moved out of language into English or colonizer languages, right? They've taken words that aren't quite right, or that have been imposed and then used quite well. So you mentioned songlines, Munya. Now, this is not an Aboriginal word, but it is now an Aboriginal concept. So talk us through how that happened and what a songline is.
Yep. Well, it always existed. Just Bruce Chatwin popularized that term and introduced it to the world, of course. But songlines are this. You see, all of the land is sung, and all of the stories are lying in the land where the creator beings crisscross the country. So there's a lot of particular animals and plants are connected with particular songlines that join up. The idea is that these dreamings, we can call them dreamings, as they walked across the land, they would go through all the different language groups, and the story would continue, but they change in terms of language. But the information still gets passed on, and they follow the tracks, if you like, of these ancestral beings. So you'll get some songlines that are really well known, such as the Two Men, Wadi Gudja, in Central Australia, that crosses from the north to the south. The Seven Sisters, of course, that's common to right across Australia, and a very strong Aboriginal women's dreaming, and their lines crisscross in different areas. So you can trace those song lines through the stories, and they what it means is that all Aboriginal groups have a connection to those ancestral beings, and then the stories change with what language is being spoken, what country they're passing through, and things are emphasized. The rainbow serpent, I've mentioned again, is very big dreaming, and there's crisscross patterns right across Australia. So it's songlines are really sort of maps, if you like, of the natural environment of country and the land, showing where these ancestral beings travelled and went through. So we were able to connect up with different groups across Australia through the songlines, where knowledge and information is passed along and shared with people.
Yeah, I was out on APY lands a year and a half ago on part of the Seven Sisters songline where Wetinyero chases them into the sky, and which it was. And I've been to holy places all over the world. I've been to the Vatican. I've been to like the Tomb of St. Peter and what have you. And the it's why I started with the Dreamtime question, because the presence of that event was everywhere in the stones. You come out sort of around from beside the cave, and it's in the promontory where they launch into the sky from, and it's like it's happening in front of you. It was just so moving, and that's a major song that we had. For people who are listening in Australia, we had a very large national exhibit about it quite recently in the last couple of years, because it's one of those really important ones, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And in fact, I wrote a book called The Seven Sisters of the Pleiades, where I look at that story of the seven sisters from different cultures around the world. So there's a story about the seven sisters in Aotearoa in New Zealand. There's a story of the seven sisters in the Americas, and in particular, Devil's Tower in Wyoming. I'm the only person in the world that's ever written about the seven sisters in Egyptian mythology. So there's a chapter on that. There's a chapter, Japanese chapter. They call the Seven Sisters Subaru, which are the cars that you drive, and their logo is made up of the stars there. And of course, there's 6 stars because one sister is obviously missing. And then I look at that legend in other parts, India, for instance. And what I've done is looked at all the commonalities of the stories and the common themes that come out, and they're incredible because they're all the same. They're all about usually women. In the Native American stories have some exceptions where they talk about young boys, but they're not men. They're 7 young boys, and as you know, boys hang with their mothers in women's camps, and they leave when they become men. So that kind of makes sense. There's always 1 or 2 sisters that are missing. More often it's 1. So there's this play between 6 and 7 sisters. Water is involved. They're all described as being water girls right around the world, or have a connection with women, with water, sorry. And so water's involved. There's also another common theme is honey. So we see in the Greek legends, for instance, Merope, one of the sisters, her name means bee eater. And then we look to the book of Job that talks about the sweet influence of the Pleiades. And so in the book, I say, well, what could that possibly mean? A lot of people have struggled to interpret the meaning of that verse and so forth. So that Seven Sisters dreaming is right around the world in all cultures, but with common themes. So it's just incredible.
Do all the songlines relate to the stars in some way?
Yeah, pretty much. A lot of them do, yeah. Again, because it's connecting, the cosmos with below, what above and below. So it's the connecting link, if you like. So, yeah, all of them do. The thing, too, with the stories and songlines is that there's different levels of learning and understanding. And as you progress through those different levels, you're exposed to much deeper understanding of those stories. So, as a child, you're told stories, for instance, about the rainbow snake, and you think they're fun and they're interesting kind of stories. But as you travel through life, you get more and more immersed in the stories to understand the deeper meanings behind them, and that includes that connection with the sky world.
Yeah, I think it's one of the best things. I know it's problematic to talk about a pan-Indigenous way of treating knowledge, but one of the commonalities we do find around the world is people are only given the knowledge that they're ready for. And yes. so you learn, and that's the decision of the elder in question. And so you learn, as you say, like you get a version of the story as a kid. And basically if you die as an elder, the version of the story that you have hopefully passed on before you pass on is very different. And it was really interesting being out on country in the desert, because we were with a group of people who now live out there and were associated with tourism and academia and studying. And so they're all, actually 2 of them were properly European, not just like white Australian. And so they're befriending and learning from Ananyu elders that are out there. And what was interesting is they were getting, they would ask the same question and get different answers back. And it's like, well, yes, that is entirely consistent. And it was funny because one of them, I won't give her name in case she was listening to the show, but she was quite spiritually advanced. So she was getting a lot more of the stuff that some of the other people weren't. And it's just, you find the same thing amongst Amazonian peoples. This is how you correctly safeguard and convey knowledge so that it's alive, right? You don't just give it to everyone.
No, that's right. And that's why I find it really curious in the Bible. There's that passage where Jesus says, do not cast pearls before swine. And I've really wondered about that through the years. And I think he's getting precisely to this, that, you have to reach certain levels before you can appreciate the true gems that are in the story and the true gems of the teachings in that story.
Yeah, that's I'm in full agreement, I think. So we mentioned Yoro Yoro, and I'll tell you the backstory because I think this is an amazing notion, and I think it's one that the world, environmental activism and all of these kind of things need, because it's a step beyond. One of my favorite anthropologists, Tim Ingold, says there's no such thing as the environment, and I agree with that. And I'm a permaculturalist and whatever, so I don't mean it like I work for BP, right? I mean it in the right way. And the right way is Yoro Yoro is this profound idea. And I told you I read the book at university, and I've moved around the world a bunch of times, so I'd lost it. And I was in the jungle last year in Peru in a Shipibo ayahuasca ceremony for a couple of weeks. And one of the evenings after the ayahuasca had done with us, and I was walking back to my tambo, the entire jungle around me was alive and communicating, and I'm talking to a giant. And I don't mean like I'm stoned, because it's not like the toad was talking to me with English words. First of all, he'd speak Spanish. It's Peru. But secondly, it was the word that came to my mind as I'm coming back was Yoro Yoro, where I was experiencing everything, including me, standing up alive. And it was because we've been in ceremony with an ayahuasquero whose job it was to bring that humans can take ayahuasca, and that ceremony is for the flourishing of the jungle. And I lived it. It's so weird to say it because it doesn't until you feel it. But I think, so what's Yoro Yoro? Given that you learned from the master. So
Yoro Yoro is about learning to sing the land. It's one of your greatest spiritual responsibilities is to sing the country and sing the land. And again, it's about keeping in touch with those ancestral beings that created everything. It's about working with the creative essence of things. And so the idea is that we can all play a part in making things whole and getting in touch with exactly what you described, what you experienced in South America there, about the realization that everything is consciousness, plants, stones, all have this spiritual essence. And so it's about singing. Yoro Yoro is singing to make them well and to grow, and for the country to grow and stand up alive and become alive again. And so, like with the recent bushfires, for instance, there would need to be a lot of singing now, a lot of Yoro Yoro business for country to come alive again, because people think, a lot of it's been destroyed, but it hasn't. The essence of what was there still remains there, but it needs our assistance to pull the energies out, if you like, out of the land, out of the country, and help restore that balance, that perfection. So Yoro Yoro is tied up with that. And so there would be kind of different kinds of Yoro Yoro for singing particular types of species, for instance. And so when I run my Dreamtime workshops, one of the things I teach people is how to sing the country, how to sing the land. And one time I did a workshop just outside of Canberra, a little town called Hall, New South Wales. And there was a bunch of women. We all got together for the weekend, and I was teaching them to sing country. So they were singing, making up their songs and singing about country. And so I went home after the weekend, and anyway, about 3 weeks later, my friend on whose property we did the ceremonies and that rang me and said, Munya, what did we do? And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, there on the front page of the Canberra Times was an article about these birds that are thought to be non-existent, that are extinct, they had died out. And scientists were perplexed at their return to the area. And I said, that's Yoro Yoro. That's calling those birds back to their natural place of being and, calling them back. And she said, my goodness, she said, that's really big magic, isn't it? And she said, can you imagine if we could just do that on a weekend, what would happen to this country if all the cockies of this land, the farmers, sang country and sang for Yoro Yoro, for things to stand up? And I said, yeah, it would be pretty amazing. So, so
it's such a good story. I have it on my list of questions to ask. Tell us the story of the bird species outside Canberra. So, because it's a great moment in the book, and it's demonstration. I'll tell you when the ayahuasca, so when the shaman and his musicians were singing, there's a very similar idea. The icaros are the songs that the spirits actually teach the shaman, but they also are the spirit. And as we were there in ceremony and they were singing, then it came our time to do the same. The feeling was and I mean it, I think I mean it in an Aboriginal context. This is what ceremony is, and it's what humans are obliged to do. So it was the first time in my life that I felt fully what a true human is supposed to do, and that custodianship extends into this kind of ceremony, into this kind of flourishing ceremony, and to have the jungle all around. And it wasn't just me, there's 20 of us there, right? But I had these words for it the next day when we were talking, like, this is what that felt like. And it was one of the two peak moments of my life. And I think you're correct. Like, if you can just with a weekend bring a bird species back from oblivion, if we actually did this, if we returned to the true role of a human as a custodian, and the sky is the limit.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it certainly is. So yeah.
Right, one additional concept, and this is what I mean by them being interrelated, right? So we've done country and dreaming and songline. The other one is, what's law? L-A-W.
L-A-W, yeah. Well, now I'm living on the eastern states of Australia now, but of course come from the Kimberley area. I find that living here on the East Coast, that a lot of Aboriginal people on the East Coast tend to make a distinction between law, L-O-R-E, and L-A-W. In the Kimberley where we come from, there's not that distinction, because really there's law for everything in this world. There's law for poetry, there's law for housekeeping. It just means stories for things, whereas law is something really quite different, and it's deep and it's profound. It's about your responsibilities. It's about proper conduct. So you're taught the law of things. So, for instance, if you've ever read Dingo Makes Us Human, who's not the writer who wrote that, Deborah Bird Rose, the fantastic writer, but she talks about dingo law in Northern Australia, in Yarralin community in Northern Territory, where death is said to be dingo law. It was dingo that brought that law into the country and taught people how to be human, taught them language and so forth. So law is, in many ways, is connected to the notion of natural law, and not so much about legal precedent and so forth, but this idea that everything is ordered and proper. And that's why it's important to sing the songs, because it maintains that order in the world. So it's very much about rules and what you can and can't do. So there's women's laws, that's there's a lot of secrecy around that. And there's also men's laws. And then there's community laws, the wider laws that everybody else knows about. So it's really about making us aware that everything in life, in existence, in consciousness, has these laws that govern their structure, their being. So it's about getting in touch with that, but also having to be responsible human beings and following the law proper. The other thing about the law is that it's not seen as man-made. It's seen as being handed down from the ancestral beings who handed us their laws. And so you get one animal or plant saying, this is the law for singing for water in this country, and this is the way it is. So the idea is that no one individual gets to change the law at all. It's about maintaining the law as it existed from the beginning of all time. In the book, I give an example of this. Among the Yolngu people of Northern Territory, their law is symbolized in a particular tree in their region. And so the tree stands as a symbol for their law. The leaves are the jurisdiction for the laws. The roots are about being connected once again to the country and the land. And also, once again, Dreamtime beings, all of them, all walk cross country. So the law tree once did that as well. So there's esoteric meanings with their word for foot that's connected to roots, that is about, it's reminding you about how the ancestral beings walked across the land and then laid their roots down into the ground, the laws, if you like. So in many ways, it's like some ways about whitefella law, about doing the right thing and being proper. But once again, it goes very much a lot deeper than that. And it's the elders who maintain that law and make sure that you follow things properly and do the right thing. And of course, there were all sorts of punishment for breaking certain laws and so forth. So
it's a good word, right? Like, it's a strong word, and
I think it is, yeah.
because
I think it's
it reminds you that if you break kangaroo law, bad things happen. Like it's like a traffic law. Like, don't do it. It's the rules of how we live in right relations. Speaking of Deborah Bird Rose, right? And a good example, we've mentioned the bushfires, right, is that we have lived outside the law. We have flaunted the law for decades, nay on a century, when it comes to custodianship and fire law and tree law and all of this kind of stuff. And when you break the law, tragedy happens.
Exactly. It's about, people haven't been singing the country, haven't been singing the land. They certainly haven't been doing the indigenous bush practices, burning practices, bushfire practices, and so forth. So, the land goes, too
I like
much.
it. I don't like what's happened. It was a deep and profound tragedy, right? I like law as a strong word because I think it makes you. People coming from a non-Aboriginal background, it makes you realize that if you break, like, it is overfishing is a violation of law, like, and not letting the penguins back in at Manly is a violation of law, like, and not in a European sense, in a cosmic sense. You're actually breaking cosmic law, and it's the right way of thinking about it, I think.
And it's making us accountable. That's the other thing.
Yes.
Accountable to country, to spirit, and so forth. So it keeps you in line, for sure.
All right. So one last one. I love this, and I think it is. Maybe I'm wrong, and obviously you could feel free to correct me if that is indeed the case, because it certainly isn't the first time. I love the Dadiri section in the book, and because it reminded me another person, Bill Naiji's work, has been very inspirational to me, and he has that notion that feeling is like the preeminent mode of Indigenous thinking. So and it's something that you have to, if you haven't grown up with it, you don't know how to use it, and that's awful. But so what is Dadiri? Let's talk about that.
Dadiri. So it's deep listening, and Auntie Miriam Rose is one of the advocates of it. It's part of her own dreaming. She's a freshwater person, and her dreaming is about Dadiri is the springs, the water that are a deep source of knowledge, and it's also about a meditative state. It's about teaching us to walk in country and to open our dreaming, what I call our dreaming ears, and listen to country and listen deeply to one another as well. Listen to the plants and the trees and the rivers and each other, but listen deeply. So, I teach people when they're walking through the bush how to walk in that dreamtime state. It becomes another state, another way of being and being in touch with country. But it's also, it is about getting you in touch with feelings, deep feelings, deep within the land, deep within our souls. And so once you have that connection, that's why you can cry for country if you get in touch with that real deep feeling that you have for country and all our relatives and countrymen around us. So it's an Indigenous meditative practice for walking in the bush and and connecting with all of creation.
It must be very pleasing teaching people how to do that who've never done it before, because when we did the magical geography and place course, there were exercises of that. We would call it sensing or whole sensing, but it's a similar process of being on country and just being open and being kind of aware in a 360-degree sense and being open to the impressions and not filtering. Like the thing that people do is get in their way when they do it, right?
Yeah,
and what was fascinating is everyone would come back from this experience and the stories or the impressions they received were similar or the same, and it blew their minds. I'm like, yes, it is a legitimate mode of experience and communication. Like you just haven't used it before.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, but when you do, it's so powerful and it's so moving.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, Munya, the book is fantastic, and of course the details for that, as well as one of the webinars, will be in the show notes and all the rest of it. I'm floored. I don't know if maybe I skipped it if it's in the book. I didn't realize your connection to David Moljale. That's amazing too. So I've had the most wonderful chat, and you've been really, really gracious. And for people who would like to know more about yourself and your work and so on, where should they go and what can they do?
Yeah, they can look at our website, www.evolve with an S on the end, evolves.com.au, where you'll find information about our cultural awareness courses that we run. My Dreamtime book is available for sale there under products. And people may be interested to know, I've written a book with my business partner, Carla Rogers, and that's coming out in April, and it's called Practical Reconciliation, What You Can Do to Make a Difference. So that will be available soon as well. But people are welcome to contact me through the Evolve website. You can send an email to me, munya@evolves with an S, .com.au. I'm happy to chat to anyone if they have any questions, and just to make contact and say hello.
Wonderful. Well, once again, congratulations. And the book is, it's the book I wanted.
Yes.
And thank you so much for an amazing chat.
Cheers.
On a personal level, this conversation is very well timed. I just got back yesterday from Ngā Ariki Kaiputahi lands on the east coast of New Zealand, and probably one of the main areas we deep dove on there was the inextricability of Indigenous sovereignty and what we're calling among the membership mutual flourishing. You will or may recall from one of the episodes with Marcus Matafero-Lloyd that New Zealand was the first country to legally enshrine the personhood of one of their rivers into law. And on the one hand, particularly when compared to much of how the rest of the world operates, this is a truly exciting and welcome development. But on the other hand, it really just makes it slightly less difficult to sue a company for polluting it, right? So it seems to me what is needed, and fortunately what I see happening in a newly emerged pan-indigeneity that we saw with movements such as Standing Rock, is the fully conscious mobilization of indigenous concepts and ways of seeing. It's that animist epistemology rather than ontology I've been going on about for years. And what was so great, amongst the many things, I guess, about this conversation with Munya, is that we got to explore some of the notions that emerge from Aboriginal Australia that I think have urgent worldwide utility. Those would be, dreaming, country, yoro yoro, and dadiri. And it seems like, so these are two things at once, right? Firstly, they are obviously context specific, largely, I think, because they are about the unavoidability of context in many respects. But they are also, in some sense, designed for export. They represent a genuine and open sharing of Aboriginal philosophy with non-Aboriginal philosophy. And it's because these notions are so powerful and profound and, as I said, urgently needed, right? And I guess I'm just really struck by that. If you are too, be sure to check out the show notes. There's a webinar presentation on the Dreamtime from Munya, as well as links to additional resources, including where to buy her books. But that's it for this week. We'll be pulling on some similar threads over the next month or so in the lead up to my London events, so stick around for that. Like, share, subscribe, etc., etc. Until next time.